Shalom, all praises, glories, and honors to Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai Bahashem, Racha Kodash. Double honors to my elder apostles and bishop elders of Great Millstone, who have taught me this truth, as well of men of like mind. Shalom wa chesed, which means peace and mercy, to the elect of the nation of Israel, whom are you so-called Negroes, Latinos, your Native American Indians, and Israelite foreigners of the Ascendant of our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whom are scattered here in America, which is Babylon the Great, and abroad. To you I say Shalom, and Yahweh Bahashem, Yahweh Shai Ratazah. This lesson is edifying and informative. In the news from the RT, U.S. making Europeans suffer, the Gauli's grandson. UK to suffer more than most this year, FT. And from the CNBC, gold surges to 6-month high, and analysts expect records in 2023. Again, U.S. making Europeans suffer, the Gauli's grandson. Washington is profiteering from the economic war against Moscow, Pierre de Gaulli has said. The word profiteering means act of making a profit by methods considered unethical. Profiteering is a pejorative term for the act of making a profit by methods considered unethical. Extortion, overcharge, extortionist. So Washington is basically being an extortionist from the economic war against Moscow, a statement that was made by Pierre de Gaulli. Now, this should immediately remind us of the book of Revelation, chapter 17, verse 16, which reads, "And the 10 horns represents the EU, which thou sawest upon the beast represents NATO. Collectively and ultimately, the beast represents is the pagan Roman Empire, which came back in the form of NATO and the EU, with America being an extension of that empire, because America is the woman that is riding upon the beast. These shall hate the whore, and that whore is America." And this article that we are about to read here serves as another example as to why the beast shall hate the whore, because it is evident that Europe is beginning to further dislike America, Babylon the Great, because it has been profiteering from the current circumstances in Europe between Russia and the Ukraine. It reads on to say, "And shall make her desolate." How will they make her desolate according to biblical prophecy? By thermonuclear fire, and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. Okay, so the title of this article should have had immediately remind us of Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. Okay? By fueling the Ukraine conflict and waging a pre-planned economic war against Russia, the U.S. is making Europeans suffer, Pierre de Gaulli, the grandson of former French President Charles de Gaulle, has said. And how is the U.S. profiteering? The fact that they have forced Europe to cut off their most convenient gas supplier, which is Russia, to instead buy gas energy ultimately from the US at a much higher premium, in contrast to cheap Russian gas that they were originally paying and buying, okay, from Russia. After leading the French resistance against Nazi occupation during World War II, Charles de Gaulle founded the modern French political system and served as president from 1959 to 1969. His grandson, a strategy and corporate financial consultant, said he believes that the Ukraine conflict was incited by the West. Of course it was. It is, after all, the West is a proxy war between the West and Russia. I revolt and protest this intellectual dishonesty in the Ukraine crisis because the triggers of the war are the Americans and NATO. Pierre de Gaulle told the Franco-Russian Dialogue Association last week. The United States, unfortunately, continues the military escalation. How? By sending weapons and aiding Ukraine, making not only the Ukrainian population suffer, but the European population as well, by forcing Europe to impose self-inflicting booming sanctions against Russia. The scale and the number of sanctions show that all of this was organized a long time in advance. It is an economic war from which the Americans are the beneficiaries, therefore they are profiteering. The Americans sell their gas to Europeans, for a price 4 to 7 times higher, there you go, than they do in their own country. Thus, the West is profiteering from this current conflict. And one of the reasons why the beast will further hate the whore. The Western sanctions imposed on Russian fossil fuel exports have exacerbated the financial and energy crisis in Europe, making everyone suffer in their daily lives, de Gaulle said. He also accused former German Chancellor Angela Merkel of knowingly contributing to the conflict by authorizing the Ukrainian nationalist expansion, which came after the 2014 pro-Western coup in Kyiv. The government that came to power that year sought to annihilate Russian culture and the ability to speak Russian in the largely Russophone Donbass, he said. The Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, DPR and LPR, broke away from Ukraine following the 2014 coup. The 2014-15 Minsk Accords, brokered, if I pronounce that correctly, by Germany, France, and Russia, were designed to provide a peaceful reintegration of the rebellious territories into Ukraine. But it had been later brought out that that agreement was pretty much something that was used to stall or to help Ukraine become stronger against Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin cited the need to protect the people of Donbass and Kyiv's failure to implement the Minsk peace accords as reasons for launching the military operation in Ukraine in late February. The DPR and LPR, along with 2 other former Ukrainian territories, joined Russia after voting overwhelmingly in favor of the move in September. Merkel, as well as former Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko, stated last year that Kyiv had used the accords to buy time, there it is, in order to rebuild its military and economy. Ukraine has adopted several laws since 2014 that restrict the use of the Russian language in the public sphere, including education and the media. This includes the article. So again, this article serves as another example as to why America's allies in NATO and the EU will hate her. Okay, the beast shall hate the whore. In other news, UK to suffer more than most this year. Consumers reportedly face a tough, grim, and miserable economic outlook. Britain faces one of the worst recessions among the world's leading industrialized nations this year, the Financial Times has reported, citing economists. In an annual poll of 101 leading UK-based economists, the majority told the outlet that the fallout from spiraling inflation triggered by the pandemic and the Ukraine conflict will persist for longer in the UK than in other G7 nations, and the country's recovery will be one of the weakest. GDP will shrink to the most, for most of 2023. The government will have to run a tight fiscal policy, and the Bank of England will keep interest rates high, the report said. John Philpott, an independent labor market economist, told FT that the 2023 recession will feel much worse than the economic impact of the pandemic. Other respondents described the outlook for consumers, especially those in low incomes, as tough, bleak, grim, miserable, and terrible. The outlet writings. Inflation hit double digits in the UK last year, peaking at 11.1%, year on year in October, the highest level for over 40 years. The BOE raised rates by a combined 325 points last year to their highest since 2008. The spike in consumer prices was attributed to the global surge in energy costs. Other nations will suffer economically as well, as the IMF predicted last week that a third of the global economy will be in recession this year. However, according to the Financial Times, even once the recovery is underway, Britain will most likely continue to lag behind other nations, as mistakes made by the government have exacerbated existing problems such as poor productivity, big business investment, government neglect of public services, and damage to trade inflicted by Brexit. This concludes the article. So, a lot of Europeans in the UK will suffer. And not just those in the UK, but also those throughout the rest of the G7 nations, the rest of the world, ultimately, especially also here in the US. Okay. Now, let's move on to our last article from CNBC, and this is a sign that the dollar is pretty much at its end. It's weakening. Gold surges to 6-month high, and analysts expect record in 2023. Gold prices have been, and this is real money, okay, not the fiat money that we use. Key points. Gold prices have been on a general incline since the beginning of November, as market turbulence, rising recession expectations, and more gold purchases from central banks underpin demand. Several analysts are projecting record highs for the precious metal in 2023. Now, what I'll do here is, just so the article can come up. London. The price of gold notched a 6-month high early Tuesday, and analysts believe the rally has further to go in 2023. Spot gold peaked just below 1,850 per troy ounce before easing off to trade around 1,833 per ounce. U.S. gold futures were up 1% at $1,844.10. Gold prices have been on a general incline since the beginning of November, as market turbulence, rising recession expectations, and more gold purchases from central banks underpin demand. In general, we are looking for a price-friendly 2023, supported by recession and stock market valuation risks. An eventual peak in central bank rates, combined with the prospect of a weaker dollar, see that, and inflation now returning to the expected sub 3% level by year end, all adding support, said Ole Henson. So they know that inflation, which was never transitory, will only continue to appreciate. Okay, it will not go back to the sub 3% that the Federal Reserve usually keeps it at and desires it to go. Head of commodity strategy at Saxo Bank. Spot gold price over the past 12 months. So as we can see here, the price of gold was at its peak in April of 2022, well above $2,000 per ounce. Went down, and now it's going back up. In addition, the de-dollarization seen by several central banks last year when a record amount of gold was brought look set to continue, thereby providing a soft floor under the market. Looking ahead, Henson suggested the key events for gold prices would be Wednesday's minutes from the last, today was Fed minutes, from the latest U.S. Federal Reserve meeting and Friday's U.S. job report. Above 1,842, the 50% mark of the 2022 correction, gold will be looking for a resistance at 1850, and 1878 next. Henson added. New all-time high in 2023? Well, more than likely, as the dollar continues to weaken. Much of 2023 outlook for global markets hinges on the trajectory of monetary policy as central banks ease off the aggressive interest rate hikes of the past year amid slowing economic growth and possible recessions. Economists are divided as to whether this will culminate in rate cuts by the end of the year. However, as inflation is expected to remain well above the target range in most major economies, a full dovish pivot by central banks this year would likely have major implications for gold prices, according to strategists. Eric Strand, manager of the AUAG ESG Gold Mining ETF, said last month that 2023 would yield a new all-time high for gold and the start of a new secular bull market, with the price exceeding 2,100 per ounce. Central banks as a group have continued since the great financial crisis to add more and more gold to their reserves, with a new record set for the third quarter of 2022, Strand said. It is our opinion that central banks will pivot on their rate hikes and become dovish during 2023, which will ignite an explosive move for gold for years to come. We therefore believe gold will end 2023 at least 20% higher, and we also see miners outperforming gold with a factor of 2. Bullion bullishness, was echoed toward the end of last year by George Keener, Managing Director and Chief Investment Officer at Swiss Asian Capital, who told CNBC last month that the current market condition mirror those of 2001 and 2008. In 2001, the market didn't just move 20% or 30%, it moved a lot. The same in 2008, when we had actually a small sell-off in the market and the stimulus coming back in. And gold went from 600 to 1,800 in no time. So I think we have a very good chance that we see a major move, Keener told CNBC's Street Signs Asia in late December. It is not going to be just 10% or 20%. I think I'm looking at a move which will really make new highs. And this concludes the article. So lots of interesting things are going to be taking place in the future, happening in the future. And eventually, when the dollar collapses, that's when, people for a period of time are going to be using, gold and silver. But then eventually they're going to move forward with a digital asset or assets, towards their New World Order agenda, which is to cause all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hands or in their foreheads. Okay? Which is the CHIP, the RFID microchip. So this is the book of Ezekiel, chapter 7, verse 25. Destruction cometh, and they shall seek peace, and there shall be none. Mischief shall come upon mischief, and rumor shall be upon rumor. Then shall they seek a vision of the prophet, but the law shall perish from the priest and counsel from the ancients. So soon, when all hell breaks loose, people are going to attempt to seek peace and safety. People are going to attempt to seek comfort. But all they'll be able to find is not more than despair and destruction. They're going to attempt to seek out the men of the Lord, the prophets, but they will not be able to find us. Okay, they'll attempt to go to their false prophets, their false leaders, like Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, if he's still alive. Who else? Farrakhan. TD fakes, all these false prophets, false leaders, and they're going to lead them to their destruction. Because scripture says, if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. So when they're going to attempt to seek the Lord, they won't be able to find the Lord. But the Lord shall perish from the priests and counsel from the ancients. So with that, I pray this lesson was edifying and informative. This has been another in the news. Just wanted to make it, real brief, straightforward, to the point. Until the next Lord's willing, I say Shalom. Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai, Ba'ashem Achak Udash Bakatam, to the elect.